The deafening wail of sirens ripped Jake from sleep like a punch to the gut. The shrill, piercing noise seemed to be coming from somewhere close, too close. Groggy and disoriented, he stumbled out of bed and peered through his window. His heart nearly stopped. Out on the lake, his prized patrol boat was tearing through the water at full speed, emergency lights flashing wildly in every direction. The unmistakable red and blue glow sliced through the morning haze, and even from a distance, Jake could see shadowy figures dancing, drinking, and swaying dangerously across the deck. A bottle sailed overboard, followed by a faint cheer from the boat's passengers. Jake's blood ran cold. He recognized the figure at the helm. Linda, the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator, the tyrant of petty rules, and now, apparently, a makeshift pirate captain. His pulse pounded louder than the alarms still blaring from the boat. This wasn't just a stolen party boat. It was a decommissioned Coast Guard patrol vessel, fully equipped with working emergency systems, radar, and, most alarmingly, an automatic distress beacon that could trigger a Homeland Security alert if mishandled. Barefoot, Jake bolted out the door, sprinting down the gravel path toward the dock. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some confused, some amused, others already filming the chaos. Jake didn't care. His mind raced with visions of what might happen next. Coast Guard helicopters, SWAT teams, federal agents swarming the lake. All because Linda had decided his boat was the perfect centerpiece for her impromptu lake day. Just 2 hours earlier, Jake had woken to a peaceful morning. He'd brewed coffee, fed his aging golden retriever, Rusty, and sat on his porch, gazing at the calm lake. His patrol boat, affectionately dubbed Lake Sentinel, rested proudly at the dock, a relic of his Coast Guard days. Most assumed it was just a nostalgic purchase, but Jake knew better. It still had active communication gear, radar tech, and even a powerful water cannon that could knock a grown man flat when tested. It was no ordinary boat, and he'd never imagined anyone would dare touch it. Linda, though, was no ordinary person. Since Jake had moved into the neighborhood, she'd treated him like her personal enemy. Whether it was the stray weeds in his yard, the shade of green on his shutters, or the supposedly oversized mailbox, Linda always found something to nitpick. She wielded her HOA presidency like a scepter, issuing orders and fines with a smug grin that drove Jake up the wall. The previous day's spat had been typical. Linda had marched up his driveway, clipboard in hand, declaring that non-recreational vessels violated HOA rules. Jake had laughed in her face. "It's a patrol boat, Linda. It's not a hazard. It's history," he'd said. She'd huffed, muttering something about eliminating nuisances, before stomping off. He never thought she'd actually follow through. Now, as the boat careened across the lake, Linda was out there joyriding with a crew of clueless HOA board members. Jake's feet hit the dock, his chest heaving. His neighbor, Sam, stood watching the madness unfold. "She said you gave her permission," Sam called out with a half-laugh. "Said you offered it for the HOA party." "Yeah, well, she's about to get a private meeting with the Coast Guard," Jake snapped. He leapt into Sam's speedboat and yanked the ignition cord. Out on the lake, Linda was having the time of her life. Wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, she grinned as her friends sipped wine and snapped selfies on the deck. The boat's blaring alarm was just annoying background noise to her. One of her tipsy friends stumbled to the control panel and started pressing random buttons. Linda cackled as a lever unleashed a powerful jet of water into the air, drenching a nearby kayaker. "Linda, maybe we should turn this off," one friend shouted over the sirens. "Oh, relax," Linda barked back. "It's just some outdated military junk. It's barely afloat. We're fine." But it wasn't fine. What Linda didn't know was that her little escapade had already activated the Coast Guard's automated distress system, a protocol reserved for emergencies like hijackings or theft. The lake was soon swarming with officers mobilizing from all directions, their sleek, armed boats slicing through the water. Jake's speedboat bounced over the waves as he closed in on his runaway vessel. Linda's chaotic party raged on, oblivious to the approaching forces. Jake waved frantically, shouting her name, but she ignored him, too busy posing for selfies with a plastic tiara perched on her head. Moments later, Coast Guard boats caught up. Blinding spotlights illuminated the lake, and loudspeakers blared. "This is the United States Coast Guard. Stop your vessel immediately." The partygoers screamed, wine glasses shattering on the deck. Linda staggered back, still refusing to relinquish the helm. "It's a misunderstanding," she yelled, waving her arms. "We're the HOA. We're authorized. Stop the boat, Linda," Jake shouted, pulling close enough to lock eyes with her. "This isn't a party boat. It's a military vessel. They think you're a threat." Whether it was panic or sheer defiance, Linda slammed the throttle forward instead of stopping. The boat lurched, nearly tossing two of her friends overboard. In the chaos, her flailing hands hit the wrong lever. The water cannon roared to life, blasting a torrent directly into a Coast Guard boat. Officers scrambled, drenched but now furious. Seconds later, Jake leapt from his speedboat onto his patrol vessel's deck. He grabbed Linda's arm and yanked her from the controls. "Are you insane?" he barked. "You're the one keeping illegal military gear in this neighborhood," she shot back. "That illegal gear just triggered a federal response team," Jake snapped. "Congrats, Linda. You're officially a domestic threat." Coast Guard officers stormed aboard moments later. Linda, soaked and defiant, tried to justify herself by reciting random HOA bylaws. "As acting president, I have the right to commandeer local property for recreational purposes," she declared. The officer stared, baffled. "Ma'am, you hijacked a government vessel, assaulted officers with a water cannon, and triggered a Homeland Security alert," he said flatly. "You're coming with us." As Linda was led off in cuffs, Jake stood at the helm of his reclaimed boat, breathing a sigh of relief. Across the water, neighbors gathered on their docks, some cheering, others shaking their heads. Linda's tiara, now soggy and crumpled, floated lazily by the hull. "That's Linda for you," Sam muttered from his dock. "She just can't resist controlling everything." Jake chuckled grimly, steering his boat back to shore. "Well," he muttered, "at least she's finally found her calling, disaster management." The adrenaline still coursed through Jake as he stood at the dock, dripping from his chaotic rescue. Linda, handcuffed and drenched, was being loaded into a Coast Guard boat, yet she still wore that smug scowl, convinced this was someone else's fault. Jake wasn't so sure this was over. That evening, two Coast Guard officers knocked on his door. The stern one, Lieutenant Carter, introduced himself with a square jaw and buzzed hair. His quieter partner flipped through a notepad. "Sir," Carter began, "we need to talk about today's incident with your vessel." Jake invited them in, still wringing out his shirt. Rusty wagged his tail weakly, sensing the tension. "You know that boat's still got active military equipment, right?" Carter asked. Jake sighed. "I bought it through proper channels, auctioned off by the Coast Guard. The gear wasn't supposed to be live, just old comms and radar." "Well, that old radar triggered a priority alert," Carter cut in. "Homeland Security flagged your boat as a potential hijacking threat. We're lucky this didn't spark a statewide lockdown." Jake rubbed his temples. "Linda's the one who stole it. I'd never let that happen." Carter nodded grimly. "We know. But she also broadcast an open distress signal on an emergency channel. Every Coast Guard unit within 100 miles scrambled because your boat kept repeating emergency in Morse code for 20 minutes. Jake slumped into his armchair. "Unbelievable. That's not all," Carter continued. "When she fired that water cannon, it hit a response team. That's technically assault on a federal officer." Jake couldn't help but laugh. "You're kidding me." "Wish I was," Carter said dryly. Linda's arrogance had always grated on Jake, but this was absurd. Arguing HOA rules to Coast Guard officers mid-chase felt like something out of a bad comedy. The next morning, Jake inspected his battered boat. The damage wasn't severe, some scuffs, a broken railing, and the stench of spilled wine across the deck. Linda's crew had trashed the interior with empty cups and snack wrappers. Worse, the control panel was scratched from her frantic button mashing. It'd take weeks to fix. As Jake scrubbed the deck, Sam wandered over with a grin. "Heard the Coast Guard still buzzing about this mess. They're not thrilled." "You see Linda today?" Jake grunted. "Oh yeah," Sam chuckled. "Her husband bailed her out. She stormed home, ranting about how her authority was violated. She's telling people you tricked her by pretending the boat was recreational." Jake snorted. That woman's unhinged. 2 days later, an envelope was taped to Jake's door. Inside was a letter in Linda's pompous style, claiming his boat was a public safety threat and he'd face HOA fines. Jake marched to her house. She answered with a fake smile, as if she hadn't just been arrested. "This letter's a joke, right?" Jake snapped. Linda's expression hardened. "That boat's dangerous and an eyesore. It ruins the neighborhood's peace and aesthetics." Jake struggled to keep his cool. "Linda, that eyesore saved lives when I was in the Coast Guard. It's functional for emergencies. I represent this neighborhood," she shot back, "and that boat doesn't belong here. I'll take it to court if I have to." "You already hijacked it once," Jake retorted. "You think a judge will side with you?" "I was misunderstood," Linda said smugly. "And if you don't cooperate, I'll find another way to get rid of it." Jake walked away, knowing Linda wouldn't stop. She escalated her crusade. Flyers spread across the neighborhood, claiming his boat held hazardous chemicals and endangered kids. Rumors flew faster than Jake could counter. Then one evening, as he grilled burgers, he heard a metallic clank from his boat. He raced to the dock. In the dim light, Linda was hunched over the control panel, fumbling with switches. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. She jumped, spinning around. "I'm shutting this thing down before it causes another disaster," she hissed. Jake grabbed her wrist before she could flip more switches. "I know what I'm doing," she snapped, wrenching free. "No, you don't," Jake shot back. "You're one switch from sending another emergency signal." Linda gasped, realizing her mistake. Jake shoved her off the boat, ensuring she landed safely on the dock. "You're done," he said coldly. "I'm filing trespassing charges and reporting this to the HOA." Linda stormed off, screaming about ungrateful neighbors. The next morning, a Coast Guard official inspected Jake's boat. After checking the wiring, he shook his head. "You're lucky you stopped her. She nearly triggered another distress signal." Jake's chest tightened. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. Linda's recklessness was dangerous. That night, he sat on his porch, watching the lake. Linda's house, 2 doors down, glowed with bad intentions. He knew she wasn't finished. The next day, Jake spotted Linda in her driveway, rallying a small group of HOA members, pointing at his house like a general plotting war. That afternoon, another letter arrived. Emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance, safety concerns regarding unauthorized watercraft. Jake chuckled bitterly. At the meeting in the neighborhood clubhouse, Linda stood smugly at the front, a table of documents beside her. She launched into a speech about community safety, painting Jake's boat as a ticking time bomb, one wrong button from launching missiles into homes. Some gasped, others looked skeptical. "Let's not forget," Linda added dramatically, "this boat caused a federal incident. Coast Guard officers were assaulted with a military-grade water cannon." Jake stood. "Enough, Linda. The only reason the Coast Guard showed up is because you stole my boat and started pushing buttons like a toddler. You nearly triggered another signal by sneaking aboard the other night." Linda's smile wavered as whispers spread. "I've got the Coast Guard report," Jake continued. "That military-grade cannon is just an emergency water jet. The only thing it fires is lake water." Linda flushed. "You're exaggerating. I have proof your boat violates HOA standards. And I've got proof you committed trespassing, theft, and triggered a federal response." Jake shot back. "Want to compare?" The room buzzed. Linda faltered. The HOA delayed a ruling until legal matters settled. She stormed out, furious. Days later, Jake woke to power tools at his dock. Linda and 2 workers were installing a giant sign. "Warning, dangerous vessel, HOA restricted area." "Are you kidding me?" Jake shouted. Linda grinned. "It's a public safety notice. I wouldn't want anyone stumbling onto your death trap. You don't have authority to put warnings on my property." "HOA Rule 38 allows emergency signage for hazards," she retorted. Jake nearly laughed. "You're the only hazard here." Linda snapped a photo of her sign and left. Jake knew she was building a case. He visited the Coast Guard station, explaining the saga to Lieutenant Carter. Carter chuckled but handed Jake a document, an official certification declaring his boat a decommissioned historical artifact. Carter offered to send an officer to the next HOA meeting. When it arrived, Linda strutted in with a folder of evidence. Before she could speak, Carter entered in uniform. Linda blanched. He explained the boat's status as a preserved landmark, cleared for civilian use. "If anyone tampers with it further," he added, They'll face felony charges for interfering with government property. The room applauded. Linda stormed out, defeated. Her influence crumbled. Neighbors mocked her, dubbing Jake's boat the HOA enforcer. A month later, a flyer appeared on Jake's door. Vote Linda for mayor, a fighter for change. Jake laughed until he choked. That weekend, as he watched the sunset from his dock, Linda fumbled with campaign notes on her porch, scattering papers in frustration. Jake couldn't resist. "Hey, Linda, need a campaign boat? I know a great one." She growled, slammed her binder shut, and stormed inside. For Jake, that was victory enough.